This podcast is for educational purposes only, does not constitute legal advice, and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you need legal assistance about a legal problem, contact an attorney.
Howdy and welcome to Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage. I am your host, Simone Murphy, and co-hosting with me today is Melissa Hooper.
Hi, everyone.
We have a very important discussion today on some recent clarifications in Texas's abortion law and how they impact medical professionals. This is really critical to understand and be aware of as a physician in Texas right now.
And to help us navigate this topic, we are joined by Mr. Tony Bertolino, who is the managing partner here at Bertolino LLP, and he specializes in professional license defense. Welcome, Tony.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm excited to discuss this very important issue that directly impacts physicians and medical professionals throughout Texas. I do want to add, before we get it deeper into this podcast, is I'm well aware that this is a very delicate and sensitive topic. So this podcast, like all our podcasts, we're really presenting information to the public and, letting them know and informing them about the laws, the regulations, and the legal interpretations that affect their careers and businesses. So we won't go into, the politics behind it or the sensitivity of the topics. This firm or anybody here doesn't take a position one way or the other. So I do want to throw that out as a sort of a caveat to those viewers that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. This is just for educational purposes, just for informational purposes. We're just going to give you the facts. So, Tony, let's start with an overview. Can you walk us through these recent legislative changes and what may have prompted them?
Absolutely. Well, the current law that we have in Texas, which actually went into effect on September 1st of 2021, it's called the Texas Heartbeat Act. And what this law did, or what this law does, is that it bans abortions if there is a what's considered or called a fetal cardiac activity, which is a heartbeat in the fetus. And that normally occurs approximately 6 weeks after pregnancy, hence the name, the heartbeat, or the Texas Heartbeat Act. However, what happened with that law is that it used a lot of very vague and ambiguous language, which left physicians really uncertain about when they could legally intervene and perform abortions or not. And, they really there's a lot of vague language, and doctors were very confused as to what constitutes a medical emergency, which of course has led to delays in care because of these legal consequences. And the new bill, what it does, it aims to clarify that when medical professionals can act in cases of when there's a medical necessity to avoid any kind of criminal or civil penalties. From the criminal side, doctors are very concerned because if they don't do what they're supposed to do under the law and it's not clear to them and they perform abortions anyway, they could face criminal penalties such as life imprisonment, let alone civil penalties, which include up to a $10,000 fine for every abortion, as well as recovery of attorney's fees and court costs. And what's also interesting about this particular law is that it allows anybody in the public to file a lawsuit against physicians who violate this abortion ban. So there's, these doctors are very concerned, and rightfully so, as to what they can and cannot do under the law.
Thank you for that. And that definitely makes sense. So what specific changes are being made to clarify this law?
Well, it's really it has a lot to do with the language, the clarification of certain language and definitions in the current law. One key update is removing the term quote unquote life-threatening as a threshold for medical intervention. Instead, now what the law states, or what the proposed law states, is that the physicians can use their medical judgment to determine when an abortion is necessary to protect a patient's health. And of course, legislators, when they created this law, I'm not certain whether or not there were physicians, and there probably were, who were, who drafted some of this proposed legislation. But many of them aren't. Many of them are lawyers, and they're not doctors. They're not, in position of, at the time of making those sort of judgment calls, those medicinal judgment calls that only doctors can do when they're on site and they're treating a patient. So really, that's what it does. It clarifies a lot of what the law is and how it's applied, and it also protects doctors from liability if they are acting in good faith and they're not intentional in their acts.
And that seems like a really big step for medical professionals who have, so far been hesitant due to that unclear language. How does this affect them in real world practice?
Well, as I mentioned before, there are consequences, severe consequences, if the
Yeah.
law is violated. And what these new changes would ultimately do in clearing up the language, it'll provide some assurances or reassurances for the physician, so they can they can prioritize the patient care without fearing any type of civil or criminal prosecution. These doctors have been really avoiding cases that could be legally questionable, even if the patient, is in danger. So what this bill does, it helps remove that hesitation, allows the doctors to do what they're supposed to do and follow the Hippocratic oath and to do no harm and protect the patient's care.
That's a crucial point. Have there been cases where hesitation has led to poor patient outcomes?
There has actually there have been reports of delayed care because these hospitals, they were hesitant to allow the care to move forward, and they required their legal departments and to review before approving these emergency medical procedures. So really, you think about how does that really provide good patient care if you have to go through these different levels of scrutiny and questions by a legal department. And of course, this has put both the patients and the doctors in possible situations, which would have have an impact on the patient care. With this clarity in the language in the laws, the physicians will be in a better position to make medical decisions without these legal uncertainties.
Yeah, and like we've been saying, this is a big change. So let's kind of look at where this bill stands right now. What is the current status of this legislation?
Well, currently the bill, certainly has bipartisan support in Texas, but it still needs to go through the committee hearings, and of course, these committee hearings are composed of lawmakers, experts, and the public, and they're permitted during these hearings to speak very openly and even debate about language in the legislation or whether or not the legislation should pass. And of course, it's got to go through these committee hearings before reaching a vote in the Senate and the House.
If the bill is to pass both Senate and in the House, what would the next steps be?
Well, afterwards, if it's passed, it would then go to Governor Greg Abbott for his signature. And of course, if Governor Abbott signs that law or that proposed legislation, then it becomes law. However, if it doesn't get past the committee and doesn't get enough votes, it could die even before reaching Governor Abbott's desk.
And if it doesn't pass, then what would happen?
Well, the lawmakers will have to go back to the drawing board really and look for ways to introduce language in the legislation and that would truly result in bipartisan support. They'd be able to reintroduce that proposed legislation in future legislative sessions. Of course, what they're going to need to do as well, if it doesn't pass, and to make sure that there is good bipartisan support, is they may have to make some adjustments or changes in the proposed legislation to gain broader support.
Gotcha. Well, I feel this has been very insightful discussion and a hot topic in today's picture. So before we close for the day, Tony, what final advice would you provide for medical professionals trying to stay compliant?
I think it's very important that, medical professionals, licensed physicians, they stay informed about these legislative changes. Make sure they're mindful of these changes, make sure they're mindful of new laws and changes to the current law. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be responsible for understanding and knowing the law no matter what. I mean, they're ignorance of the law there's no excuse for that. Is an old adage used, and that applies here as well. Another thing that I recommend is, if necessary, work with legal counsel, work with an attorney when you have doubts as to your understanding of not just the current law that's in place now, but any changes in the near future. And and do what you can to really advocate for for a good understanding of what these changes are in the law. At the end of the day, you're responsible for not just your license to practice medicine and protecting the patients, but you're also responsible for making sure that you avoid any type of civil or criminal liabilities.
Fantastic advice, Mr. Bertolino. Thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. For more information on this bill, you can visit Texas Legislature online. There you can track this bill's progress, see its history, and more. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow Know Your Regulator for more continued updates on the changes in your professional landscape. Until next time, stay inspired and continue engaging with your regulatory agency.
Know Your Regulator, the podcast that inspires you to engage.